Reading makes me feel like I'm in the Matrix, right? So maybe it's not quite as fast.
Sure.
But you get to jack into this thing, a book.
Yeah.
You get the information, and all of a sudden you know Kung Fu or whatever.
Yeah.
But so few people do. Do you have a trick? Like, if there's somebody you really love, and I really struggle with this problem, somebody you really love, you want to help, you know that either just a diet of reading or a particular book that they need to read. How do you spur them to take that action?
Usually I'll say, like, look, you have to fucking read this book. I'll buy it for you, like, right now.
Right.
One thing that people don't understand is the opportunity costs of reading, right? I think about this as a writer who sells books to people. Like, it's not like the $13 or the $15 that scares people off. It's like, man, that's like 3 days of reading, or that's a week of reading, or however long it takes you to read. And so they think it's going to be, like, really expensive to read, and that's why they don't do it. And so, like, I try to stress, like, the return on that investment, right? Like, Warren Buffett says the greatest investment he ever made in his life was in, like, 1950 when he read this book by Benjamin Graham, who was the investor who then became his mentor and taught him everything. So here, he, you know, whatever the book was then, it was probably like, you know, 8 cents or something like that. This book is, he attributes literally billions of dollars of value to that book purchase.
100%.
And so, like, it's like, what is a book that changes your life worth, right? And so I put the calculation that way. Like, you know, I've read books that have made me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've made books that, you know, if I hadn't read, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. And so I try to stress to people, it's like, look, what you get out of this book is not going to be like, you know, a cool quote or, you know, like a couple little it could be potentially something that changes your life.
Right.
And so when I recommend books, I try to focus mostly on, I think, books that will change people's lives too.
Yeah, that's actually what your list is called, right? Because you have a book list. Great. I just got 3 books off of it today.
Oh, nice.
And it's titled books to live by, or books that'll change the way you live, or something
books
like that.
Books to base your life on. So my first book is about media manipulation and marketing, and I had a job as the director of marketing at American Apparel, and we're sort of dealing with a lot of media crises. So I'm like, oh, I don't have a ton of experience here. Lots of people have gone through this before. What books can I read that will help me with this problem? Right. So I went and I read everything I could. And it was like by these academics or these journalists, and I'd be like, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not like this at all, right? Like this is just not, this is good in theory, but it's just simply not how it works, right? Or it's not how it works anymore. And so I don't have a lot of patience for people talking about the way that things should be, or the way that things might be, or the way that they think things are. I like to focus on how they actually are. So, like, you know, one of my mentors is Robert Greene, who wrote the 48 Laws of Power. People are mad at him, not because what he says is true, but because he would say it, right? Which is like the opposite of pragmatism, right? That's like willful ignorance. So just because something works doesn't mean you have to do it, or that's the way you have to do it. You can make a choice, but I feel like you've got to understand things very realistically and very pragmatically if you want to do anything about it, or you want to just make sure that you don't, you know, find yourself screwed over somewhere.
Right. How did you come to that realization?
I don't think you can read history or read the actually sort of smart doers/thinkers of the world and still walk away thinking like naive idealism is a force for good in the world. Right. You know, it's just not. It doesn't get people where they want to go.
I think in your answer you've already touched on this, but it'd be great if you could distill it. What's the value of pragmatism?
Stoicism and a lot of philosophy is all about perception, right? How you think about things determines, to a large degree, you know, what you're going to be able to do about it, right? So if you tell yourself that something happens is the worst thing that's ever happened, it's totally unfair, you're not going to be able to do anything about it, that's obviously a less productive attitude than, well, this is unfortunate, but I'm going to be fine, or like, they didn't know any better, or, you know, this is actually good. That being said, you know, the secret is not real, right? It's not just like if you want something to be good, it is good, right? Like when Shakespeare says nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so, he's not saying like thinking magically makes the world better. You still have to do something about it. So pragmatism, I think, comes after this sort of, managing your perceptions. Pragmatism is, okay, this is what I think is possible here. This is what I think is important. This is the task that I've set up for myself. Well, now how am I going to go about it? I'm not going to go about it naively. I'm not going to go about it, in an entitled fashion. I'm not going to go about it in a lazy fashion either. I'm going to go about it in a way that says, I'm going to get this done, and I'm willing to do essentially whatever it takes to make that happen, even if other people say, and I differ from the Stoics a little bit too. The Stoics are very big on notions of like honor and dignity and right and wrong, and I am too. But I'm just saying, like, you set out for a path. It's deciding, like, I don't care what the rules say, or I don't care what the way you're supposed to do it is. I'm going to let the task take me where it needs to go.
Yeah, so now let's get into something really weird that we're going to get hate mail for.
Okay.
But if people understand where we're actually going, I think we'll be all right.
Okay.
There are people in my life whom I love very dearly that operate on a sense of principles.
Sure.
They're objective things that are right and wrong, and their behavior to someone else's behavior is always predicated on the principle.
Okay.
My advice to them is always, don't deal with the world the way you wish it was. Deal with the world the way it actually is.
Yeah.
Which means if, no matter what you say to somebody, they take it negatively and they spin out of control, we probably don't say anything to that person. We completely go around them. What do you think the Stoics would think about that?
Yeah, so the quote that I based the book on, he says, like, when people try to obstruct us, he's like, they become irrelevant to us. We just do what we need to do to do what we need to do. But I think principle is still very important, and the Stoics would certainly agree with that. That's what they're saying. There's this one quote. He's like, "Can only ruin your life if it ruins your character." Right? This is a quote from Marcus Aurelius, which I think is great. At the same time, there's another quote from Saul Alinsky, the political strategist who was very influential to both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. He's a very controversial figure. He's sort of a pre-Robert Greene. He's saying, like, in order to make the world what you want it to be, you have to accept what it is first. And I think that's the problem, is people get so vividly live in, like, the idealized future that they want, that they make decisions as if it is already the case and already true. And so it's like, let's say you want to be a writer, or you want to have a video show. It's like, if you wrongly think that the world is eagerly anticipating everything that you're doing because you walk around thinking like all eyes are on you all the time, you're going to launch your show and it's not going to get seen by anyone because you've grossly underestimated the amount of noise that you have to break through. If you're a writer and you think you want the public to consume a certain kind of content, but the public actually likes this kind of content, and you produce this stuff, no one's going to know about it. So it's like, you've got to understand what the world is. You don't have to take it as destiny, but you have to understand it so you can make decisions based on that reality. So ideally, you can move the ball forward. Yeah,
the way you said it, I think, is really perfect. It's not just accepting the world the way that it is, as if it's fatalistic. It's accepting it so that now you can, and I hate this word, but now you can manipulate it, or the word I prefer, orchestrate it.
Sure.
You can move the pieces that you need to move because you actually understand what that takes.
Yeah.
I know you've done a lot of research on 50 Cent, so I'll feel bold and I'll quote him right now. This is chess, not checkers.
Yeah.
And when people, that's something that I say to myself a lot, and I think self-narrative is either massively destructive or massively empowering. Mm-hmm. And reminding myself that I'm here to play a game of chess and not a game of checkers. It's not the simple move. You're not trying to get crowned. You're trying to play a long game. You're trying to be 5 steps ahead of the next person and anticipate their reaction to your reaction. And once you start embracing that notion and forcing yourself to think ahead in the reality, once you abstract it from the analogy, it becomes really about theory of mind, right? I can project myself into that person. I can understand how my moves feel to them. Mm-hmm. I understand the secret demons, insecurities, fears that they have that compel their behavior, which would otherwise seem completely irrational. And when you read, so also on my essential reading list at the very bottom, because, oh my God, you got to get through a lot of stuff before you're ready for it, but Dan Ariely, the Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality, like those books talking about the foibles of the human mind and the weird way that we go about processing it. And so the obstacle is a way, just coming back to that again, The reason that just from beginning to end made a lot of sense for me is it was, and you have said that all of writing, in fact, is a way to communicate something about the human experience.
Yeah.
And I felt like Stoicism, as you present it, goes beyond just communicating about the human experience. It gives you a tool to use in your fight to transform things. So if, for instance, the obstacle for me is fear or it's insecurity or whatever, to ask myself a different question. Okay, how do I use this fear to propel me forward?
Yeah.
How do I recognize what this is or control my brain to completely eradicate it? Like, what does all of that look like, and then how does it move me forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this with my employees. It's like, something there, and you probably get this a lot, where it's like someone comes to you and they're like, this terrible thing happened, or like, we were supposed to do this, but, and then, I think the very human natural response is like, that is bad. But like, what an entrepreneur does, or what a Stoic would do, I would say, is go, okay, that is true. Now what, right? What are we going to do instead? What are we going to do because of this? Yes, this we were going to do this, but then we found out that that's closed, or we were going to buy this, but we found out it's too expensive. Any number of things that can happen in the course of a business. Okay, that closes off certain opportunities, but by its nature also presents different opportunities, or it forces you to look at a other list that you had previously, right? It forces, plan A doesn't work, you have to go to plan B. So what are you going to do instead? And I think what's really important is that you waste as little time as possible lamenting the failure of plan A, or, the closing of, list number one of opportunities, and you focus all your energy on looking at the next list, because it doesn't accomplish anything the other way.
Do you know the marshmallow test?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so while I don't know that they actually studied the correlation between what you're saying and that, but if I had to guess, there really is, and the people that could wait the longest to eat the marshmallow also are the ones that can most rapidly move away from lamenting and onto what the solution is.
Sure.
And guys, another book that's on the list, which I'm sure all of you have already read, is Lynchpin by Seth Godin, and in that he talks a lot about stop thinking about what you think you're supposed to do when you show up to work every day. Start being results driven. Start focusing on that, because that notion of delivering excellence and using the Stoic definition of what is right, what worked, right? If I'm supposed to deliver excellent results and it's not working, I'm not delivering those results, by definition, I'm doing something wrong. That notion was very empowering to me, because it became this instant filter that I could use for any decision in my life, right? Am I doing the right thing or the wrong thing? Well, is it moving me towards my goals or away from my goals? If it's moving me towards my goals, it's right.
Yeah.
If it's moving me away, then it's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's what that's the essence of strategy, right? This is what I want to do. This is my plan to get there, but I understand that the plan is going to change and be very fluid. But as long as I'm moving towards where I want to go, it doesn't really matter the course that I take to get there.
Right.
And like, look, sometimes the course is very short, right? Sometimes everything goes exactly the way you want it. Sometimes it takes 20 years. Like, you don't know. And we're all on different paths, and we're all on multiple paths, right? So, your business life could be going swimmingly and you don't run into a lot of obstacles, but your personal life is where you have the obstacles. And so you want to focus on improving that. Like people go like, so what adversity have you faced in your life? And I know what they want me to tell them this like sob story. Right. And it's more like, no, yesterday I was trying to deal with this thing and they were being a total dick about it, and I had to decide how I was going to deal with it. That is a form of adversity. And so Stoicism is Stoicism is a great philosophy. If you're ever, randomly enslaved and exiled by an emperor, you can use Stoicism. But it's also great if you're just, waking up and you work at Google and you've got to deal with office politics all day. It's not about just these big moments. It's like your whole life is going to be a series of slight impediments and obstacles, and the more prepared and resilient you are for them, the further you're going to get while everyone else is held back by those things.
Right. and we often say that Quest is a company born of misery. We had tried businesses the traditional way of doing something we didn't care about, identifying a niche in the market and exploiting that niche, very much along the lines of not the exact techniques that you talked about, and trust me, I'm lying, but the same kind of thing of seeing exploitable things in marketing styles and just taking advantage of it. And it was just soul-crushing for us. So we said, all right, the next business is going to be something we really believe in. It's going to be totally based on passion. And there was something that in clicking over, realizing I'm now going to very specifically remove the line between work and life, and I'm going to make them the same. And we didn't know if it was going to crash and fail, right? Our big thing was, hey, this could be a total suicide mission.
Right.
But if we're going to do it, we're going to do it together. So our wives all ended up being incredibly involved. In fact, my wife is the one that produces all this stuff. And so for us, it is that constant rebuying into what we're each doing, constantly sort of rediscovering who each other are becoming and finding that the commonality and the things that you can share and learn from each other to make sure you're pointed in the same direction. But I'm always super hungry for those kinds of insights from people that are similar.
I would say that if I'm looking at like my biggest sort of failures or mistakes in business, they're almost exclusively times where like something came up and I was thinking about it, and then I asked my wife what she thought, and then she told me, and I thought, she's not right here. Like, this is like the one area where she's wrong. Like, I'm going to have to disagree and make an executive decision and do this thing. Those almost always blow up like so hard in the face. Like, it's almost 100% of the time.
Right. But I love that you keep doing it. That's fantastic.
Well, I try not to anymore.
No, I'm the same, right? Because in the moment, it really feels like, I got this one.
Right.
This one, I'm good.
Yeah, it's like, you just don't understand. There's this, this, and this. But those things happen to be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you come to believe in the power of mentorship?
I mean, I guess I just saw it illustrated. Like, my formal education ended when I was 19 or 20, and I was able to jump ahead of a lot of people. Like, where I am in my career, like, you know, you'd think I would be in my 30s or 40s. I'm here because, like, smart people were like, no. That's not how it works. Let me show you how it's actually done. Or like, they were like, let me show you how I do it. And so I learned, I think you learn better from a teacher who's a master at what they do than you're going to learn from, you know, a professor in a university.
Yeah, pretty powerful decision. You've talked a lot about how Robert Greene taught you to think critically or logically. I forget which word you used, but can you distill that lesson for us?
Yeah, I mean, like, so this is a guy who's like a world-renowned strategist. He advises like world leaders and entrepreneurs and businessmen and women and athletes and all sorts of people in between. So this is what he's studied, right? He's like one giant brain who's like studied like all of history and sort of distilled what those lessons are. So when I was working for him as a researcher, he's not only like asking me to explore these things that are helpful, he's like, everything is a microcosm, right? The way that he thinks about his book is a strategic way, right? Like, most writers sit down and just like write and they see where it goes. Robert has this like, you know, ornately planned out sort of outline, and everything is organized and there's resources, and it's before, like, the book is written before he writes. And so like I was forced to learn that system and also given a sort of meta lesson in how strategy and planning and thinking works from that model. And it's just, I think it's like, you know, I could have read about it, I'm sure, but it's much different to like have someone instruct you in it and put you through a kind of a process. What
is the actual like process of approaching something critically?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I could express it succinctly, but I think it's not just consuming information, but consuming that information, digesting it, organizing it, and then finding ways to put it to use. So it goes into, like Seneca talks about, putting your words into works. It's not just about reading about the stuff. It's saying, I read this thing, now I'm going to try it, right? Like, I could read a book about flying an airplane, but at the end of it, I'm not really any better at flying. Like, I might know where some shit is, but I don't know how. It's taking the knowledge and then breaking it apart, making connections to other things, but then executing it in some way, even if it's just talking about it with other people.
You talk about it in reference to one of the greatest college football dynasties, the process.
Yeah.
Is that a decent?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, I have a chapter in the book where I'm talking about the process, which is this idea of like, we think that what success requires is this like grand vision, or this like very ambitious goal, and then you got to be focused on that goal at all times. It's like, no, the goal matters, and you put it sort of off to the side once you've articulated what it is, and then you get to that goal by focusing on the smallest composite parts and focusing on executing with excellence there. So Nick Saban at Alabama, he's talking about, it's not like we got to win this game, or we got to win this, we got to win this division, or we got to make it to this championship game. It's like, we got to finish this down. We have to practice well today. I have to run this play as best as I possibly can. It's about focusing on these very small composite parts. And actually that's what I learned that from Robert in a book. It's like, how do you break this thing into these small pieces, get everything you need to do that well, rather than it's sexy and fun to focus on the big stuff, like revenue goals or this, but it's not fun to say like, how am I going to treat this one person in this one situation? Or how am I going to make this difficult decision about this employee or this piece of business? That's where it's the accumulation of those things that makes you successful. So you can't just go like, oh, it's going to take care of itself. Like, that's what separates the men from the boys.
You have a great way of looking at how one should evaluate themselves. And you said, a lot of people compare themselves, like they decide what their value system is for themselves. The most important thing for me is family, or the most important thing for me is success in my career. And then they compare themselves to people who are, in your words, running a different race. Can you give people that insight?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this in my own life, because I think it's mostly comes down to ego, right? It's like this is who I want to be, this is what I'm working on, these are my priorities, this is what I'm doing. And then you go like, but so-and-so just got a new car. Like, I want that car too. And you're like, but that person that person got that car because they wake up and they go to a job they fucking hate every day. Like, why would it's not, part of it is that there's trade-offs in life. And maybe that person traded a lot of things that you would not be willing to trade to get that thing that you're now jealous of. But I think what's really distracting is basically we try to have, you try to eat your cake and have it too, right? You try to say, I made this choice, I'm doing this thing, because it would get me this result. And then like halfway through, you're like, but I also want this other mutually exclusive result. Right. And that makes people like really, really, not just unhappy, but now all of a sudden they're not focused on the one thing they were supposed to do. And that's why they're talking about, like Saban is talking about focusing on these individual goals too. He's saying, don't focus on another team's record. Focus on winning the game that you have to win today, because there's so many other factors that you don't control. That if you focus on, you're going to get distracted and you're not going to do the very difficult thing in front of you. So I think it's really important that you figure out are you the kind of person that like lifestyle or freedom is more important than money? Or are you the kind of person that is money is very important to, or power is very important to, or relationships are very important to, or influence is very important? And like, you've got to make those choices. And when I advise clients, I feel like half of what I do is just untangling their conflicting or mutually exclusive goals. And then once you know what it is you want to do, then you know all the shit that you get to say no to and not feel bad about. This was luck, but like, I went to a school where I had a scholarship, so I didn't have a ton of student loan debt. If I was already 80 grand into my college education, I'm going to be much less likely to leave. Or if when I got my first job and the paycheck started coming, if I bought myself a huge house, I'm not going to be able to say, you know what, let's pack up, let's move across the country, I want to be a writer. Like, you have to make sure that part of strategy is retaining as many options as possible to switch direction. And I think, not only do a lot of people not know what direction they want to go in, but they make choices that force them to go in one direction permanently, unless they want to make a lot of painful choices.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today, man. Truly, I've stalked you on the internet. You are a wealth of information that is incredibly usable and applicable. To have somebody who authored one of my Quake books is very meaningful to me. I can't thank you enough for just putting that book out into the universe, but for coming in and talking about some of the principles with us today. Guys, if you're not already following this guy everywhere on the internet, you should be. RyanHoliday.net is the website, @RyanHoliday on Twitter. He puts a ton of amazing stuff out there. You're going to want to check it out. It's all meant to empower you, so you can't look for better than that. All right, guys, this is a weekly show, so be sure to subscribe and come back, and we will see you next week. Until then, be legendary, my friends. Take care. All right, man. It's awesome. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Really fantastic. Thank you.
Still ahead on Inside Quest.
I don't have a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan. I know what's important to me, and every day I wake up and I do things that are connected to that important thing, and I don't get distracted with other stuff.
Inside Quest continues right now.